We will continue with chapter 5, Kurukshetra. In our last session, we saw how Sri Aurobindo, taking this question of Kurukshetra as an occasion, has gone deeper into the very principle of war and destruction. That how it is a universal principle of our life, here in its purely material aspects. And we have seen a kind of a very broad sketch of how the ancient Greek philosophers as well as modern scientists and then even the Upanishads have talked of this universal principle. And then we see this principle of war and destruction is not only universal on the physical level, but it is also a mental and moral, on the moral and mental levels also it is pretty universal. And that is where we discussed quite at length the question of the principle of harmlessness, what we call the question of non-violence and ahimsa, that how it does not really work in the present circumstances and with the present consciousness of man. On the contrary, this question of soul force, what we have known in India as the Satyagraha movement or the Atma Shakti movement or whatever, that is also not the right thing, because even soul force, when it is effective, it destroys. So, we had concluded that this question of non-violence, etc., do not work, and perhaps humanity is not yet ready to take the step beyond. Explaining the same question of non-violence and the principle of harmlessness, we see in the next paragraph, which we shall take up for this class today. Moreover, every time we use soul force, we raise a great force of karma against our adversary, the after movements of which we have no power to control. Vasishtha uses soul force against the military violence of Vishwamitra, and armies of Huns and Shakas and Pallavas hurl themselves on the aggressor. The very quiescence and passivity of the spiritual man under violence and aggression awakens the tremendous forces of the world to a retributive action. And it may even be more merciful to stay in their path, though by force, those who represent evil, than to allow them to trample on until they call down on themselves a worse destruction than we would ever think of inflicting. Well, this is, you can see on the occult level, it is an explanation of the harm that this soul force could bring to the aggressor. That means instead of saying, all right, if somebody is aggressive and is conquering your country or destroying your country, etc., and we say, fine, we will be non-violent, we will resist the person by non-violence. This is what we call the question of the quiescence and passivity. You see, at that time, maybe we do not have the immediate pain, and as Aurobindo would write somewhere, that we may not remain clean, our hands should remain clean. That means our hands are not full of blood, and we may say, no, I have not killed anybody, I have not done anything. We are taking up a non-violent stance. This kind of a quiescent and passive movement, in fact, he would say, whips up greater tremendous forces on the occult level, and which take a vengeance, a revenge on the aggressor. So occult wise, try to understand this. If on the physical level, when the aggressor or when the violent movement is coming, if you do not stop it on the physical level, even though by force you would say, then if you are quiet and he or the evil or the aggressor with his violence is allowed to trample upon you, then what happens is that they may conquer at this time, but the after effect of this action are much more on the aggressor than you. Because this is a kind of a repressed force. This is, when I'm kind of, what we said in this question of the non-violence, if somebody slaps you on one cheek, you show him the other cheek. So this kind of a passive movement, it evokes a greater karmic law on the aggressor. That's what we should understand in the occult level. That under this greater karmic law has effects on which you have no control. You see, we do not know what is going to be your karma. But because you have been an aggressor, you are arousing a kind of a karmic force in your own life. Whereas if the opponent came and stopped you, then on the physical level itself the karma completes itself. You understand this logic? If on the physical level the two forces equalize themselves, or whatever the consequences, somebody wins, somebody loses, that is much better than leaving the aggressor to his own karma. And karmic retribution is much worse than what can be on the physical level. So this is something perhaps is difficult to accept, because we have been so much whitewashed with this idea of non-violence and ahimsa. But that is the occult explanation. And we have also discussed at length in our last session that how this karmic law works on our own Indian subcontinent. That how our country has turned violent because of this same principle. That when there was aggression from the Britishers, we did not act. You see, in the beginning there was the revolutions. Revolutionists from Bengal especially. So that was a kind of a very good one-to-one equal on the physical level. That is why when there was Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, or when Aurobindo was there, when there Bal Gangadhar Tilak, all these people, they did not believe in non-violence. They opposed the British face to face. But that was something better than in the latter part, where the whole movement became non-violent. Then what happens on the aggressor? Aggressor is not just the Britishers. Even all those Indians who have participated. So you see, the whole thing has rebounded on our own country now. The violence that our country is seeing now in the last 2 decades, a little more if you want to take the other terrorism movement that has started in our India, Pakistan, etc. And also we have a wonderful example here where Aurobindo says that it is more merciful to stay in their path. I mean, if we stop them with force, with violence, if necessary, is much more merciful that okay, some of you are killed, some of us are killed, but the death is finished and it's done with this life. But if it continues in the karma, then we are doing you greater harm. So Aurobindo says, oppose them on the physical level itself. Here we have the example of Aurobindo trying to stop the Cripps proposal. Trying to accept and said, do not stop the Cripps proposal. He knew that if the Cripps proposal is not accepted, then there will be greater retributions. So he on the physical level sent a force, sent a man, sent a message saying, please accept the Cripps proposal. Although apparently it seems contradictory to our own Indian interest, but he saw through that how much this rejection of the Cripps proposal, how it's going to boomerang on us. And all of us know, in India at least, how it has boomeranged on India. Because the proposal was not accepted, then they thought of the division of the country. And once India Pakistan were divided, and rest is history, last 60 years, what has happened? The millions of people who were killed in Pakistan and India during the time of partition, and I know some of you have come from Pakistan to settle in India, you people know that, especially those who are living in Punjab. And then the wars, and then the terrorism, all this would have stopped if we had accepted the Cripps proposal. So you see, this is what Aurobindo would mean by the karmic law that takes over with a greater vengeance. So today, after 60 years, we are having parlance, and we are having parlays, and we are trying to mitigate the thing, trying to become friends and all that. But if you see the amount of loss, it is much more than if we had faced the Britishers at that time and gotten rid of them and finished it. But alas, we could not follow that. So it is not enough that our own hands should remain clean and our souls unstained for the law of strife and destruction to die out of the world. That which is its root must first disappear out of humanity. So we took we were praised saying, oh, these Indians are not really violent, they are not really killing any Britishers, they are not doing anything. Our hands were clean. But the evil did not stop at that. This force in the name of Britishers or those who are supporting the Britishers, etc., all that oppressive forces of the country, they continued. And that oppression has now redoubled, multiplied itself into what you are seeing, the destructive forces in the country. Much less will mere immobility and inertia, unwilling to use or incapable of using any kind of resistance to evil, abrogate the law. So this is, Aurobindo is driving home the same point, and I'll read out another explanation from another book, that if Arjuna at that time refused to fight, then you see what would be the consequences. Why is Sri Krishna taking so much trouble to explain to Arjuna? Because he knows if Arjuna does not fight, then the retribution, the act of vengeance, then the Dhritarashtra will become the king, Duryodhana would be the leader, and then a whole nation would be destroyed, as it says in another book. For thousands of years, India would have vanished. So Sri Krishna knew all that. That is why he is taking the trouble to convince Arjuna, this is not the moment to think in these lines, you have to act. You have to act and stop that evil force that is represented by Kauravas. Inertia, tamas, indeed injures much more than can the Rajasic principle of strife, which at least creates more than it destroys. Therefore, so far as the problem of the individual's action goes, his abstention from strife and its inevitable concomitant destruction in their more gross and physical form may help his own moral being, but it leaves the slayer of creatures unabolished. So, a conclusion giving more or less the same idea. So far as the problem of the individual's action goes, his abstention from strife and inevitable concomitant destruction in the more gross and physical form may help his own moral being. You see, this question of satyagraha and non-violence and ahimsa is more a moral law, it's not a spiritual law. That's why in Sri Aurobindo's eyes, all those who took to non-violence movement, it was more a moral movement and nothing to do with the spirituality. That's when religion, politics and morality came together, and then it became a a kind of a mistaken identity. So, what Sri Krishna gives here is a spiritual attitude, nothing to do with morality. If it is not Sri Krishna, if we had bent to this moral law, that famous incident of Karna being killed by Arjuna when Karna himself was really bogged down in his chariot. At that time Krishna says, shoot at him. But had it been a moral thing, one couldn't have done that. Because somebody who is not ready to fight and who is in a disadvantage, at that time the Kurukshetra war did not allow a warrior to fight with somebody or kill somebody who was not equally equipped to fight back with you. But here was Karna completely at a disadvantageous situation, and then Krishna tells Arjuna, shoot now. So morally it was immoral, but Krishna was not making a war on the moral grounds. He was doing it on a spiritual law, which sees the future, which sees the establishment of a new dharma, and not go by the morality, which, as you know in Sri Aurobindo's own language, is made of human mind, by human mind. So human mind itself does not have the vision. It has some partial understanding, and the same moral law today it changes and tomorrow it changes once again. So that way morality is there to guide us, but it is a mentalized law which doesn't stay for long. That is why one generation and next generation breaks that law, because it's a mental law. The new generation has a new concept of life, a new openness to life, a new approach to life, and their mind works in a different manner. So they don't bother breaking the old mental law, and which the older generation would say, oh, they're breaking down all the morality. But morality is only a mental law. So Sri Aurobindo is saying that this kind of an abstention from strife and concomitant destruction in their more gross and physical form may help his own moral being, but it leaves a layer of creatures unabolished. But you may be saying, oh, look, I am a great satyagrahi. Look at my hands, they're clean, there's no blood on this. So morally you may feel purified, or maybe you're a sattvic man. Look, I am a great man. But you have not killed the opponent, the evil. You have not stopped it, nor have you killed it. So you have only allowed it to grow. You individually have escaped saying that I am clean. But in your individual escapism, a whole nation suffers. So here Sri Aurobindo would say, we have to be together and go above moral law and fight for the nation. In fact, we have again another incident where, as most of you know, you must have heard about it, all the Aurobindonians, the incident of Hitler, how the mother stayed. You see, that's the word I'm trying to say. It's more merciful to stay their path when the Asuric force was guiding Hitler every day, or now and then, if not every day, in its own rhythm, that it would come with a brilliant, sheen, light emanating from its body. It had a cover of steel or something. And then Hitler would go and have meeting with this force, with this Asuric power. And the Asuric power would guide Hitler every day, which country to attack, where to send your armies and all that. And Hitler thought that was some kind of a godhead, some kind of a higher spiritual power. And he blindly followed it. But the mother sitting here, she knew what this force was. So she went and stayed and stopped it. And you see, thereby she saved the world. If Mother and Aurobindo sat in Pondicherry, oh, Hitler is in Berlin, Germany, and they're attacking Europe and Russia, and we in Pondicherry are safe, you would have known what would have been the result of the war. Hitler's forces would have wiped off this human civilization. It was as serious as that. It was not just conquering England and Europe and Russia and subsequently perhaps America. That was the outer form it would have taken. But the inner long-lasting form of the evil continuing itself would have resulted in wiping off human civilization for at least 2,000 years. So what all mankind achieved in the last 2,000 years, it would have pushed it back to those ages where it would have to go back on the bullock carts. So imagine the contribution, the work done by Mother and Aurobindo sitting here. So that is where they fought the evil. They stayed it in whatever way it was necessary. In fact, the way, as we know all of us, the mother went to Hitler in the same form as that Asuric force. So you will call it immoral. So why did the mother go as an Asura? So apparently it is a kind of an immoral thing. But they do not bother about your comments, human comments. She does what is necessary for the entire humankind. And so here is another example how you must go and stop. So mother, on the occult level, she stopped it. And as a consequence, then you had the other thing that came up. What we had, this question of America bombing Hiroshima. That was a physical act, threatening to stop, that we will continue if you do not stop. So this was on the physical level a stopping of what the mother had done on the occult level, stopping of the Asuric force. So you see, on both levels action takes place. But she stopped there, and then as a consequence we see all the other forces coming in, and the rest of the story is written in history books. So that's what Aurobindo is telling us here, that let us not be sympathetic with the evil. If necessary, you take to the physical means to stop it. Otherwise, it's bad for the aggressor and also as bad for you, and for the whole country, it is worse. For the rest, the whole of human history bears witness to the inexorable vitality and persistent prevalence of this principle in the world. It is natural that we should attempt to palliate to less stress on other aspects. Strife and destruction are not all. There is the saving principle of association and mutual help, as well as the force of dissociation and mutual strife. A power of love no less than a power of egoistic self-assertion, an impulse to sacrifice ourselves for others, as well as the impulse to sacrifice others to ourselves. So now Aurobindo is now going to the next argument, that this question of war and the strife is there on the first principle. But there are other principles also working in this human society or in this human race. What is this? There is the saving principle of association and mutual help. Of course, especially on the political field, we understand this, how there is the clubbing together of different countries coming together. We say Commonwealth countries, we say this NATO, we say SATO, we do this. So that is called the association. So there is also this principle of association. Even in the Second War, we had this association of two groups, the Western and those who were with Hitler, what we have in the name of the Axis forces. So there is this principle, a natural principle of grouping together. And this grouping together and mutual help. Of course, what happened with the Kauravas, or even in the present day scenario, when America called for war against terrorism, there was already a grouping, an association. They said, yes, we will fight war against terrorism. So this is also a natural force that acts in human society, as well as the force of disassociation and mutual strife. This is interesting. Sri Aurobindo wrote this, so many years back, almost 90 years back. And we see in the recent times the question of the sanctions, disassociation, sanctions against Iran. In 1974, when India had its first atomic bomb, then the whole world said, you are turning nuclear, so there were sanctions imposed on India. 1984, 74, subsequently when others were done. So this question of association and disassociation. So these are the principles that again pull the human society or the human race and the nations. So that is one principle. Secondly, a power of love no less than a power of egoistic self-assertion. There could be this power of love. We do not know how much this power of love works on a universal level. In the sense, yes, we do understand there is a spiritual power, a great force called love, the divine love. But how much is it active amongst nations, amongst societies, amongst groups? We'll see that explanation in the subsequent lines. Then there is the third force, an impulse to sacrifice ourselves for others. This is also there, a great sense of sacrifice. When somebody is in danger, we go and sacrifice. One group says, no, we will sacrifice. When, say, for example, in India is attacked by a foreign country, then suddenly you'll see all Indians becoming tremendously patriotic. The sense of sacrifice comes. So this is also there. So what we are trying to understand is, what are the major different principles? On the physical level, a great principle of war and strife is there. On the moral levels, we have this question of the love, we have question of sacrifice, we have the question of association and helping each other. So that is why you see different modes of this force. You see, when there was an earthquake in Pakistan, even Indians wanted to go and help there. So it's just sometimes we cross these boundaries of the foreign enemies and all that. When man and suffering becomes important, so we go beyond. So where the Americans come to India, Indians go to Pakistan, Pakistani people go to Afghanistan. So that is where man unites. That is beyond the boundaries of nations. So there is a question of sacrifice and helping each other. Now, these are the principles. But when we see how these have actually worked, we shall not be tempted to gloss over or ignore the power of their opposites. Association has been worked not only for mutual help, but at the same time for defense and aggression, to strengthen us against all that attacks or resist in the struggle for life. So now Sri Aurobindo is drawing further examples, and you see the line here, says, when we see how these have actually worked, these means these forces of love, of mutual help, of sacrifice, these are great ideals. Morally they are very helpful. And they have also helped humankind. But how they have been misused also. We shall not be tempted to gloss over or ignore the power of their opposites. Association has been worked not only for mutual help, but at the same time for defense and aggression. You see, again, there is this question, when the Islamic people, they said, let us come together, have a jihad against the Western countries. So that was the force of association, trying to defend itself from the aggressor. But at the same time, you have We say, is a defense and aggression also. When America called for aggression against the terror, there was again a group of people, like Britain came in, Pakistan came in, some Western countries came in. So an association to kind of what it says for aggression, and Islamic Jihad as an association for self-defense. So there are all kinds of associations, this way and that way. It's not just all the time you associate for helping, but in self-defense also. To strengthen us against all that attacks or resist in the struggle for life. Association itself has been a servant of war, egoism, and the self-assertion of life against life. A beautiful sentence that really applies to a lot of modern movements. That it is a servant of war. So in the name of this terrorism, all these groups came together and they warred against Iraq. They are warring against this country because they say, we want to fight terrorism. That's what happened with Kurukshetra. The Kauravas and the Pandavas. They became two blocks because they wanted to really attack, wage a war, and it was a war of egoism and self-assertion. Kauravas wanted to assert themselves against the Pandavas, and that we know very well, because they did not want to give even 5 small villages to the Pandavas. They wanted to drive out the Pandavas out of existence. And in fact, somewhere in another passage, if I find it, I'll tell you. It's very interesting how Sri Aurobindo remarks that if the Kauravas have granted even those 5 villages, this war of Kurukshetra could have been avoided. You see, he needed, it is so significant spiritually, how Sri Krishna needed a little foothold to establish his dharma. But the Kauravas, they were so blind in their egoism and in their evil designs that they did not even give these 5 small villages. That was the last straw. And then Sri Krishna then saw war is inevitable. He was planning for war, we already said that. But there could have been a saving grace if Kauravas had given these 5 villages. But alas, when they refused to give that, then war was inevitable. So that's what we are saying here, that there is this association of egoism, self-assertion of life against life. Love itself has been constantly a power of death. Especially the love of good and the love of God, as embraced by the human ego, have been responsible for much strife, slaughter and destruction. But those of us who know history is very clear. All the wars of religion. In the love of God, love of good, embraced by the human ego. Religion itself was not bad or is not bad. But as embraced by human ego, as interpreted by human ego, because each religion now wanted to dominate the world, dominate other countries, and so they waged wars for hundreds of years. In Europe, we have heard those great stories. 100 years wars between Britain and France, between this country and that country. All in the name of religions. So Sri Aurobindo is saying how love itself has been constantly a power of death. Love of God, love of your religion, love of this, love of that. And what do? Love of your religion? You kill the others. Because you want your religion to dominate. So Sri Aurobindo is telling, this is a wonderful power. Love is a great force. But humankind has always twisted it for its own ends. And even quoting in the name of religion. So, he would say that self-sacrifice is great and noble, but at its highest it is an acknowledgement of the law of life by death and becomes an offering on the altar of some power that demands a victim in order that the work desired may be done. So this also we have seen. You see, sacrifice is great and noble. To sacrifice oneself for the country's freedom movement, great and noble. But then, when we have a regime of communism, so there what happens is all this question of sacrifice becomes compulsory, because people are sacrificed on the altar of the state, so that the state runs the way it wants to run. So you see, now again sacrifice becomes a victim, a noble feeling, a noble ideal has again been twisted by human ego and human mind. So what Sri Aurobindo is again and again telling us, there are all these principally great ideals, but these ideals reflected in the mind and in the human ego have been misutilized, twisted, and then we have to face the horrendous consequences. The mother bird facing the animal of prey in defense of its young, the patriot dying for his country's freedom, the religious martyr or the martyr of an idea, these in the lower and the superior scale of animal life are highest examples of self-sacrifice, and it is evident to what they bear witness. So self-sacrifice, they are wonderful examples. And he quotes very beautifully the example of the mother bird. I mean, you see National Geographic Channel, many a case you will see how the mother bird defends its chicks at the cost of its own death. It will go into the mouth of the snake, so that her children are saved. So that is an incident, an event from the animal world, but so is on the human level. We have the patriot dying, or the religious martyr, and the martyr of an idea. All these are great ideals, but on the mass level, they are used again by your own political systems. But if you look at after results, an easy optimism becomes even less possible. See the patriot dying in order that his country may be free, and mark that country a few decades after the Lord of Karma has paid the price of the blood and the suffering that was given. You shall see it in its turn an oppressor, an exploiter, and conqueror of colonies and dependencies, devouring others that it may live and succeed aggressively in life. So you see, we have many a revolution that has taken place in the West and in the East. East, we know mostly about the Russian Revolution, and of course in the West we have the French Revolution. But we have a beautiful incident here. In the French Revolution, first there were this kind of, patriots dying for the nation. Those who stood for the country. They pulled down the kings and the queens and guillotined them, because they said nation is important, democracy is important. But then, as Sri Aurobindo is telling, you shall see it in its turn an oppressor, an exploiter, and conqueror of colonies. Well, not the conqueror of colonies, but what I want to say is, the same French revolutionists who stood for the nation, they started killing their own people because they became the oppressor. This is what Sri Aurobindo is telling us. The oppressed become the oppressors. We have this in the name, in the case of the French Revolution. But in the case of countries too, it happens the same. For example, we had Germany, which was where there was a lot of this question of sacrifice when Germany was being formed. They said, no, we must make Germany strong and all that. But once it became strong, Germany started looting the Western country, the Europe completely. First World War was the same story. Then again, people started working, saying, no, we must bring back our country, the nation and the great. We have seen Germany, how much it suffered and how much it fought. When it comes back to its real strength, the same Germany again in the Second War becomes the initiator of the war. So this is what Sri Aurobindo is telling us, that People sacrifice, but not for long is a sacrifice, remembered. While even in our own country we see that. I mean, today there are still those people who fought for the freedom of our country. They sacrificed their families, they went into the jail, they lost their property, they lost their family. But today now we see the same party which had fought for the freedom country, how it has become an oppressor. And all these freedom fighters are crying hoarse, saying, is this what we fought for? So you see, there is this rhythm, because human consciousness is like that. In the beginning it is high ideals, sacrificing, but later on it again comes back into the low ideals, lower consciousness, and it starts becoming an oppressor, devouring others that it may live and succeed aggressively in life. The Christian martyrs perish in their thousands, setting soul force against empire force, that Christ may conquer, Christianity prevail. Soul force does triumph, Christianity does prevail, but not Christ. I mean, an incredible sentence. So this is where, some of us know the story of the formation of the birth of Christianity. How thousands and thousands of people lay their lives when the Romans really, hunted them out from hills and hillocks and houses and villages and hung them in the public, beat them in the public. And yet, in the name of Christ, people sacrificed, became martyrs with great joy, because they had that kind of a great faith in the Lord, that He will save. And then not only He will save, that He will rise, that Christianity will remain, all will increase. What Aurobindo is telling, that Christ may conquer and Christianity prevail. So this is what happened in the first instance, or in the beginning. Thousands died, sacrificed, so that Christianity prevails. And Christianity did prevail, but not Christ. Because in that movement, what happened? Once Christianity prevailed, well, the Roman Empire was gone by then. Romans were nobody except for a small little country. But Christianity spread throughout Europe. It conquered. It spread. But at what cost did it spread? Again, this question of aggressor, the violence. Again, in Christianity there were groups. There were different kings. There were different partitions and groups. And Christians versus Christians, they fought. But is this what Christ taught? Christ's first word and the last word were love. Love thy neighbor, He said. So here there is no question of neighbor. Each country fought each other, neighbors fought each other, killed each other, so that Christianity prevails. That is one thing. And then in this formation of Christianity, the body was made and the soul was lost. The body of Christianity, its church, its popes, its fathers, its greatness, its paintings and its art. But Christ Himself was lost. Because Christianity became an ism. What Christ had given spontaneously as a great gesture of love. Something to unite mankind, a psychic inner being. In fact, Christ was one who contributed the psychic love to humanity. You see, like each avatar contributes some element to human nature, Christ's contribution was the psychic love. So all His teachings, all His sayings are full of this psychicization. But imagine what psychicization He speaks of and where Christianity ends. It became a book, a church, a building, and unfortunately, but not Christ, He was lost. The victorious religion became a militant and dominant church and a more fanatically persecuting power than the creed and the empire which it replaced. Clear. The empire and the creed it replaced was the Roman Empire. And the creed it replaced was paganism. because Christianity was against paganism, because they wanted to establish the law of Christ only. Whereas we in India, even now you see paganism there in every street. We worship a stone, we worship a tree. Near my house in the parallel street, long back when I was a kid, suddenly we heard of a tree, that is weeping. There were tears that was rolling down a tree, and then red bloody tears. And the news spread wild in Pondicherry. And still the tree is still there. I know, I see it whenever I go that street. And we as kids in the ashram were really curious, how come the tree is weeping? Because you see, those days we didn't know much about it. In fact, I remember I even wrote to the mother that what is the truth behind this? The tree is crying, the tears of blood coming out. Obviously, mother did not reply. But so what I mean is that we have taken that the tree is a god or somebody, a goddess who is in trouble, who is in pain, so it is crying. And that is the question of, even in our own recent history, even your TV channels have shown how the stone statues of Ganesha drink milk and the stone statues of Shiva, they drink milk. Well, there is a scientific explanation that has been given later. But you see how much we believe that even in the stone there is this living God. That is a kind of a paganism. We have the tree and the sun and everything. But in Christianity what happened was, they removed this paganism and they even replaced the empire. So Sri Aurobindo writes here, not the victorious religion becomes a militant and dominant church and a more fanatically persecuting power than the creed. You see, what Romans were supposed to be the persecutors of Christians, but now Christians became worse persecutors than Romans. So was it with Islam. It started greatly, but it ended up persecuting. That those are not Islamic people, those are not Mohammedans, they are, infidels, not worthy to be living on the earth. So you see how a whole religion turns back on what it has been teaching. So the very religions organize themselves into powers of mutual strife and battle together fiercely to live, to grow, to possess the world. So this has been the common story of most of the religions, except perhaps Hinduism, that it never tried to possess the world. It tried to live and grow in its own boundaries. Well, if it went across its boundaries, it went as a spiritual force and not as a conquering force. So rest of the other religions have gone out of their own place to conquer and to possess, because by conquering another place, they thought it will grow, its numbers will grow. So the question of conversions came, conquests came, only in the name of increasing its own members and numbers. So what Sri Aurobindo is telling us here, that these are how the principle of sacrifice, how the principle of love, how the principle of association, mutual association to help each other, they get turned and twisted and the whole thing gets perverted and the whole thing boomerangs. So you see, of course, what Sri Aurobindo has given here just in one paragraph, because this is not ideal of human unity. He couldn't have developed this thought. But go to that book, Ideal of Human Unity and Human Cycle, more the Ideal of Human Unity. You will see these thoughts explained much in greater length. And of course, a paragraph that he has written about Christianity and the loss of Christ, you will see many modern books are bemoaning the same thing. How we have lost that. In fact, recently there was a gentleman from America who visited Sakar. He was telling the same thing. That youngsters are going against Christianity because they do not see the essence, they see only the form. There is only the form remaining. The essence is gone. So that's why youngsters are turning to India. But unfortunately in India also they are first attracted to the outer form. The rituals, the ceremonies. Because that's what excites the vital. Everywhere it's the same thing. So even the Westerners, when they come here, they participate in this puja, they go into this celebration, they have this color there, they have this flower there, they feel the vital excitement. But then later on, quietly, the whole thing, it sinks, and they see this is the outer facade of Hinduism. There's something deeper. But those, I must say, are fortunate ones, those who really seek within. Otherwise, some of them just see the outer and run back to their countries. Is this Hinduism I had come for? Well, that is the different story. Now, all which seems to show that there is an element in existence, perhaps the initial element, which we do not know how to conquer, either because it cannot be conquered or because we have not looked at it with a strong and impartial gaze so as to recognize it calmly and fairly and know what it is. We must look existence in the face if our aim is to arrive at a right solution, whatever that solution may be. So as these are the concluding chapters, Aurobindo is now coming back to the theory that let us first face the reality and not be afraid of it. What all Aurobindo has described about the moral qualities, about the things, how they get twisted, how they come back upon us, the war and the love and the morality and everything. And you see, an analysis like this, for example, what he has given about these three main questions of association, love and self-sacrifice, giving us an example of Christianity. Now, if this is the fact, now let us find the solution. But if you do not see this fact, even Hinduism is said, if you remember in our last chapter, how Hinduism has deteriorated. It had great ideals, wonderful, magnificent things to look up to. But just because it had this ideal of escapism, Hindu society never flourished. Because it was a negative ideal of life. Salvation was a negative ideal of life. So Aurobindo saw face to face each religion. And therefore he is in the right position to tell us that look, this is what is behind religion. And therefore, let us rectify these problems. And what is the rectification? To go beyond religion. Not into the formalism of religion, but into the essence of religion, which is spirituality. So that going back into the essence of religion is called spirituality. So you see, here is a person who is tremendously realistic, who sees the problem and then he says, can I rectify that? Can human society rectify it? Or we throw the whole thing down the lane into history, dump it into history. He says, yes, the external forms of religion must be dumped into history because it is these forms that are corrupting and perverting the human consciousness and dividing the human beings. You see a person who was constantly fighting for human unity, he sees what are the divisive elements in this human consciousness. One of the major things is religion. So now he says, let us go beyond religion and get into this unifying spirituality. So he says, we must look existence in the face if our aim is to arrive at its right solution, whatever that solution may be. And to look existence in the face is to look God in the face. For the two cannot be separated, nor the responsibility for the loss of world existence be shifted away from Him who created them or from that which constituted it. Yet here too, we love to palliate and equivocate. This is the real true Vedantin, who faces the world, sees the reality, sees the problem, and then tries to find the solution. You see, the question that we are saying is that when we say that the divine, the Brahman who has created this world, then we must accept all the evils, all the undivine things, all the wrong things, also as part of God's own design. You cannot conveniently say, no, all that is good and beautiful and marvelous is God, all that is dark and evil and ugly is the devil, whose name is Satan. You cannot separate, because you cannot separate, as it says, you cannot separate world existence and the divine. The world existence and God are always together. Because for our convenience sake, in fact, next line it says, we erect a God of love and mercy, a God of good, a God just, righteous and virtuous according to our own moral conceptions of justice, virtue and righteousness, and all the rest we say is not he or is not his, but was made by some diabolical power, which he suffered for some reason to work out its wicked will, or by some dark Ahriman counterbalancing our gracious Ormuz, or was even the fault of selfish and sinful man who has spoiled what was made originally perfect by God. You see how easy. We are trying to protect God and saying, no, he is all good. Rest of it is either the fault of Satan, either the fault of man, either the fault or this Ahriman. There's someone else who has created all this muck in this world. But God, no, he is all good. But this is unrealistic. It is not at all facing the facts of life and existence and the reality of the divine. Well, I think we take a short break here, because after this we have the last concluding paragraph. It suits us to take it up on a separate issue.